Cross Politics on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. It's good to be with you. Knox is coming. Knox is coming.
How did that music start?
Yeah, I hit the button.
That was magic.
You didn't even see it.
Didn't even see it. So
We're
good.
just going to let that song play out, too.
It's not going to turn off.
Bring it down a little bit. We got Dusty Devers coming on the show. We got Steve Dace going to be coming in the show. We're going to talk property taxes, some stuff that's actually really been probably a little nerdy for you, but I have tons of questions.
A little nerdy?
Over the next 40 years, one of my goals, and I told my wife this when I got involved as county commissioner a number of years ago. I said, one of my goals, regardless if I'm ever involved in politics again, is to figure out how to eliminate property taxes in Idaho.
Yeah.
You know,
that's a cool goal.
Lord willing, I got 40 more years left.
Yeah.
I'm 45, so at least I'll live till 80 or maybe 85. Well, Lord willing, 100.
Okay.
And then that be one of the goals of just kind of, I got my spiritual goals, I got my family goals, and that's one of my political goals.
Yeah.
So
eliminate property taxes in Idaho.
That's right.
Or at least Latah County.
Yeah. We'd have a massive boom in Latah County.
Even if the rest of the counties don't want to go with
they
us.
do their stupid stuff or whatever.
Like Latah County, we're ending property taxes.
That's funny, Toby.
America has strayed far from God the Father. She's fallen into a pit of sexual perversion, abortion, and a corrupt welfare state swelling with bureaucratic blood, greed, and tyranny. Join us in the fight to bring prodigal America to repentance at the Fight, Laugh, Feast conference next week. You got,
oh my goodness.
1 week left.
Oh my goodness.
In 1 week. 1 week from today. Mm-hmm. We're going to be, we have the pre-business conference and then Beer and Psalms. And then a week from tomorrow, Friday, is the conference kickoff. We're in Fort Worth, Texas, October 31st and November 2nd. As always, good food, good beer, good psalms, even better fellowship, and very, very good speakers. And we're doing a live Cross Politics show, so you can come watch a live Cross Politics recording. Am I allowed to tell what we're doing for that live Cross Politics show? Is that
Make America Repentant again. Yeah. And all our speakers, as they're able, will be on the stage with us.
We're inviting all the speakers to join us and everyone that's there. So it should be a great time talking about, how does America repent? Where do we repent? And a lot of the talks are, of course, centered on that. You can still get tickets at prodigalamerica.com, prodigalamerica.com. And one of the speakers, we're excited that will be there next week with us. Well, but one of them right now is Pastor Dusty Devers. He's an Oklahoma State senator. He is pastor of Grace Reformed Baptist Church. And most importantly, it says most importantly, ? No, not most importantly. This is just one of the things he does. He's a good friend. He's a good dude. Speaker at the Fight, Laugh, Feast conference next week. Dusty, thanks for coming on Cross Politics.
Hey, I'm happy to. It's always good to join you guys. And I noticed in the preview you guys did for the Prodigal America conference, you didn't include me in it. So it's good to hear you say my name, that I'm actually still invited.
You are.
That's 100%. That video is made, I think, before we officially extended you the invitation. I think.
Or we forgot.
That's my best excuse. Let's just say that's the truth.
We're making up for it now. So grateful to have you coming out. And what's your talk on next week, Dusty?
We'll see.
Great. Good.
The title's on the website, Dusty, for you.
Let me know.
That sounds great.
I'll send you the website.
He's a pastor.
I know.
He's like,
he's always got a talk ready.
I'll write that message on the way down.
Yeah,
I'm ready to go.
That's right.
So Dusty, you were actually on the floor of your legislature. When was this video? I didn't find out actually. Not too long ago. Talking about the
property taxes
tyranny
and how the state can be God.
Of taxation. Yeah. And we grabbed this clip.
We're going to play it, but when was this clip, Dusty?
It was probably during May, actually at the end of session, whenever we were arguing about passing a grocery tax. And I told him, I came to decrease the taxation burden on our people, but really I'm more in favor of ridding ourselves of unjust forms of taxation rather than the voluntary forms like a grocery tax, but whatever. So
we're going to play this clip real quick, and then we'd like to talk to you a little bit about the trouble we're in, the tyranny we're in, and then how to get out. So this is Dusty on the floor of the Oklahoma legislature back in May.
but as the Constitution of our nation and Oklahoma affirm, our rights to life and property are God-given, and when the state forces people to pay a compulsory tax on their income and come and get them if they don't, the people are therefore slaves to that state. So in the income tax and the property tax, the state is claiming ownership over the first fruits of people's work and their property, meaning that before people support their own life and the life of their family, they must make their forced contribution to the state. Again, taxing people's work is making their work and their wages accountable and subject first to the state, thus making them wards or in custody of the state. This is very different than the historic head tax. If the state can punish you for giving the first fruits of your labors, then you, by consequence, have an inherently dependent relationship with the state.
Yeah.
And man is not a dependent of the state. The state is not God. Man was not created by the state. Man is not sustained by the state. Man does not have his salvation from the state. Scriptures show that God gives man, not government, stewardship over his life and property. God grants people the right to property that's private and private ownership, which includes a man's fruit of his labors and income. Therefore, no institution or person shall violate this right over against an innocent person. And property and assets and income belong first to individuals, not to the society or the government.
So, man,
You're in a conservative state.
where's
How was that received?
Where's the organ? I want to play the organ
Yeah,
for
for
me.
real.
Knox,
Oh,
hopefully gets here.
how was it received? It was received with not much fanfare. Unfortunately, there was very little conversation about it, and we just moved on. Actually, there's some conservative folks in our Republican senatorial body, but I think these conversations need to be front and center. And I was glad to see Trump actually talking about banning or repealing a federal income tax today and putting it on the table. And I think that it was due to my video yesterday. His team saw it and they decided, yes, that's what we want to do. And we influenced his team.
That's our talking point.
That's it.
I love it. I love it. I'm going with it.
Yeah. Dusty, a property tax is, to me, it's the most wicked property tax that's assessed to us. It's kind of a gaslighting tax in the sense that they say you own your property, but just, try not paying property tax and see who really owns your property. But it's also probably one of the taxes that has the most grip on legislators, and I would probably say even the citizens, because at least in Idaho, 50% of our property taxes go to public schools.
Yeah.
And so if you go into the state and argue, hey, we need to eliminate property taxes, you're stepping on all sorts of idols.
Right.
Like you're stepping on the property tax idol, which, by this way, one of the strongest lobbyist organizations, at least in the state of Idaho, is your city and county lobbying organization.
Right.
And they will run campaigns against you. They got money.
Yeah.
And they want property taxes.
But it's like you're taking money away from kids to get an education.
That's second. And then what's the other biggest lobbying organization probably down in Boise? The union, the education union.
Right.
Right. So your county city union or a lobbyist organization, then the education union in Idaho, both very powerful. And so you just got so many factors going against you with eliminating property taxes. Where do you even begin?
Well, it's very tough, and there are a lot of layers that go into repealing a property tax. And the first is you have to come to a principled position that people's property is their own. The Constitution affirms what God's word says, and it says that people have the right to life, liberty, and property, and the government does not give them those rights. We acknowledge this fact in our Declaration of Independence, in our Constitution. The fact is that God gives us these rights. God gives us the right to ownership, the right to not have our things stolen from us when we possess them. But through this form of taxation, we have incrementally gone to a place where I think our founding fathers knew where we would end up if we allowed this form of tyranny to come in, but we haven't fought back against it. And now we have dug such a deep hole that people are going to get blister after blister. They're going to break their backs trying to climb out of it. And it's people like us who have to start digging with, doing the first groundwork on it. And Lord willing, we'll have the right to our property not usurped from us by these tyrants.
So, Dusty, obvious question comes. But how do you pay for? How do you pay for the
if you get rid of property tax, how do you pay for public schools?
How do you pay for the schools? How do you pay for the cops? How do you pay for roads? I mean, how do you pay for state services? What's the answer you give when people ask that?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of layers to that. So infrastructure or roads and bridges, et cetera, is used as one of the justifications for compulsory or forced taxation. And we always have to remind people that, like you said earlier, if you don't pay your taxes, your property taxes, some places it depends on the timing, but it could be 3 years, it could be sooner. They can take your property from you. This is legalized theft.
Right.
And so this infrastructure is used for this justification. But at the federal level, only 2 to 4% of the federal budget is made of infrastructure and roads. And at that level, you've got multiple layers, not just with your city and your county, but you have state, and then the Army Corps of Engineers has some maintenance. But then you also have private property or private roads and companies that have some, but they can take ownership back over. So, for years and years before, especially 1943, in the current tax law, we had private ownership of most of these, and for the things that people really wanted that were essential services, we would pay for. We would decide on our own that that's a good use of our money. And whenever we have really a private business owner situation or arrangement, you're going to get far greater efficiency and proficiency that will produce our roads and bridges and will cause people to pay for infrastructure at a rate that they enjoy. Now, right now, we have all these government-owned roads, and we are still being taxed on top of it in toll roads. So,
yeah.
That's just part of it on the infrastructure, but it is a vast overreach, and a small portion is from it. And if you give them an inch, they will take a mile. And the majority of federal spending is not spent on services like roads and police and firefighters. But on a local level, yes, there are different levels that people pay of their property tax. There's also ad valorem tax that pays for other aspects of these essential services. But there are ways to get around and have a much better product than the government paying for these services.
You said in the video when you were speaking on the floor of the Oklahoma legislature, you mentioned the head tax as a more biblical way of taxation. Can you explain that for us?
Well, a head tax would be essentially, in just a very simple version, if you live in a certain place and you like living there, it's worth paying a fee to live there. It's not tied to your property, your ownership. It's not tied to your income. It's tied to you voluntarily choosing to live in a particular place and knowing that there's a cost to living there. There's a cost of doing business. There's a cost of living in that area that could help pay for whatever essential services the people in that particular municipality or county choose to pay for through a collective, through a fund. Now, some of those they'll pay through private, but there are guys who have written extensively on a biblical model of the head tax.
So not quite a flat tax.
Not a flat tax.
But it's just like this municipality just determines, hey, it costs $500 a year to live here. Or something like that.
So, and then, again, compare that back to a property tax that has this inherent threat of theft.
Yeah.
If you don't pay this fee,
the government will steal your property from you.
The government will take your, I tell my my civic students, every year when we talk about this is like that means that we are all renters, basically.
Yep.
Because even if you've paid off your mortgage, you've paid off your property, you're still paying those taxes, and this hits particularly the those who are on fixed incomes, the elderly and the disabled. Maybe you think about people like somebody that saved up and so on, and then left an inheritance to their widow after they're gone. It really it puts them in a hard place, because if you want if property values are going up, well, then your property taxes are going up.
Yeah.
And if you're on a fixed income, you are eventually, a lot of the elderly are priced out of their own proprities that they paid for and worked for, which is really wicked, especially to do to our fathers and our grandfathers and our great grandfathers. We ought to be honoring them and protecting their investments, not stealing their investments from them. But what happens in a scenario with the head tax if somebody moves into an area and then doesn't pay their head tax?
Yeah, they would just lose access to certain essential services, and they would have to pay for them on their own. I mean, we do this to a degree with insurance now.
Okay.
So we can do this. And really, you got to think about, you brought up a really good point, and I'd like to circle back to it. The real aim of compulsory taxation, where the individual becomes a ward, a custodian of the state,
right.
You are bringing in another form of slavery that we have just accepted. It's not, the real aim of compulsory taxation is not roads and infrastructure and all those things. It's the consolidation of state power. And trillions of dollars fund bloated bureaucracies and serve state interests, not the people's interest. And whenever you look for forever, local governance and voluntary contributions have historically maintained infrastructure very effectively. Now, when you look at what our tax code and those broader arrangements are doing to people, is you brought up the elderly and even passing down an inheritance. The reality is we are putting people in a situation where you will have to, if you don't have a sizable income to pay the property taxes or to pay the capital gains taxes or pay the death tax or the inheritance tax, depending on your state, you will lose your property, and your heritage largely goes with that property. There's so many memories. There's so much time spent. There's so much value in assets and buildings and things that are going on in that property, and an inherent and deep tie to our history and to our heritage, that we will lose those over and over. And who gets that property at the end of it? Well, sometimes you'll have a buyer who can come in and get them, but oftentimes the city or the state or someone in the government is going to take over, because maybe often that's just how it happens. So,
or you end up with
you end up
with like big corporations or things like that too, where it's like, and I don't think people understand too, where this is one of the ways that as families allowed this to happen, as citizens allowed this to happen, what we were doing was we were abdicating the rightful power and authority of the family. The property, private property, the right to your own income, your work, and then the ability to pass that inheritance and that wealth down that God has granted you to your children and your children's children, was one of the ways that families were actually enabled over generations to become actually quite wealthy and successful and powerful. And that is actually a check on civil government.
Let me speak to that too.
Go ahead.
Because you're right. It's oftentimes these big corporations that will come in, and guess what? Most of those big corporations are using to buy up the land. They're using your tax dollars through a redistribution of wealth because of economic development. They are getting stipends or interest, or they're getting these special arrangements from their state to go in and put in what they deem as essential jobs. And they get your tax dollars to buy what you couldn't afford, or to really gobble up what you couldn't afford to keep, because you were being taxed for it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. There's opportunity costs that people are oftentimes hard to see. But there's all kinds of ways that we're being taxed to kingdom come. And And we're getting taxed federally, we're getting taxed statewide, we're getting taxed inheritance, we're getting taxed sales tax, we're getting taxed, and people have done studies of like what the actual rates are if you add it all up.
Yeah.
It's insane, and the opportunity costs are enormous.
Yeah.
What we could be spending that money on to build Christian schools, to build churches.
That's right.
To care for our neighbors.
Better provide for your family.
To provide for your elderly parents and grandparents. And build businesses. It's pretty insane, but rather, you're exactly right, Dusty. What we've allowed, the system we've allowed to happen is that the government taxes us, and then they're picking the winners and losers by their subsidies, by their tax breaks or whatever, in the name of economic development. But it's all getting funneled through them, which is just inherently inefficient.
Yeah.
But again, there's a lot of it doesn't allow for the creativity of human beings to flourish. It doesn't allow people to take
and the government ain't creative.
No, they're not.
This is a very important point that when we have a wealth redistribution, it destroys incentive and it destroys innovation. And our current tax system is heavily geared toward wealth redistribution that punishes success and productivity. And this punishment weakens the incentive to work or to innovate, to really work harder and to produce for your family. And as the fruits of your labor come up, there is more confiscation by the state. So taxation discourages wealth creation, and ultimately it makes the society poorer by disincentivizing productivity.
Right. Why would I work harder? Why would I work harder if I'm going to get taxed more?
Well, and think, you got to read an ad here after this, but think if I decided I could, because I have the skills to do this. I worked in construction for a good portion of my early years.
Yeah.
I could remodel my house, build out my second floor. I get this old farmhouse. I could build out. But then it would be now worth like whatever. I'm on 10 acres outside of town. Our housing market's here are stupid anyways. But then my house is now worth more.
Yeah.
And then they tax me more.
Tax more.
And I can't afford that consistent ongoing tax.
Right. I know. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. Page 50 is a distinctly Christian marketing company striving to help Christian-owned businesses grow and succeed in our digital age. They don't want to just make a paycheck. They want to change the world. And that means building it alongside you. The mission is bigger than just Sunday. Page 50 wants to help Christians recapture the work week, economic and political influence, and the public square. Page 50 doesn't work with just anybody, but if you're a believer, they want to work with you. So visit page50.com, spell it out, PAGEFIFTY.com, and see what they can do for you. That's page50.com.
And they'll be at Prodigal America, so make sure you get a chance to stop by their booth and all that stuff. We got also Steve Dace on the show. I don't have the music because Knox is not here, but our bad man, Steve Dace, coming on the show. Actually, we'll bring him in right now. Steve, I know I'm going to ask you those questions. I'm going to get to the presidential election, kind of your vibe on what's going on, how you understand the polls and read all that. But first, if you've caught a little bit of our conversation with Dusty Devers, this show, we are actually going to bring on a friend of the show, JD Prescott, who's in Indiana, and he's working on trying to eliminate property taxes in Indiana. So that was the kind of the original nature of the show, Steve. And then Dusty Devers had a video kind of go viral back in May about talking about kind of God.
No, they shared it yesterday, and then Trump's team found it.
There we go.
And you might have seen the New York Times headline today, and maybe Trump's thinking about eliminating income taxes.
Yeah.
And he's been talking about, anyways.
So I've never had this conversation before, but I'd love to ask you, to me, property tax is one of the most wicked taxes been assessed upon us. I would love in my lifetime here in Idaho, one of my goals, I've told my wife about 4 or 5 years ago, I was like, I would love in my lifetime in the next 40 years, eliminate property taxes in Idaho because it means you don't really own your property. So what are your big conversation, bringing you on a big question, but what are your initial thoughts on all that?
I think in general, the purpose of taxation is enslavement as a general rule, that all progressive schemes have inherent to their ideology two successive and congruent missives, which is power and control. Mm-hmm. Everything that a progressive ideology seeks involves will to power with the purpose of having control. So just look at the current housing market, for example. Our housing values are skyrocketing, which is great. On the other hand, if you can't find anybody that would buy your home and then you can't afford the next home you want to go to, they're just numbers on a page. And so that's another form of a lockdown, basically. I mean, you can't move. I mean, even if you want to, there's nowhere to go. I live in a suburb here in Des Moines where if a house for the most of the 18 years I lived here in this neighborhood, if a house was for sale for more than 30 days, you assumed it had black mold because they just did not last. Right. And now we have houses that are on sale here, if even when we rarely do, 4, 6, 9 months, if not longer. Wow. And so everything that is inherent to the progressive worldview, whether we're talking any form of taxation, anything they do constructive with it is basically a fig leaf. It's a loincloth to cover what the ultimate missive is of any progressive scheme, which is power and control. So the reason why we have a progressive income tax system is because it's an idea. It helps to pit groups against people against one another. Yeah. Opposed to just do what the Lord did in Israel. Everybody pays 10%. Now, 10% for Boaz was a lot more than the 10% the widow might paid, but it was the same rate that everybody paid. Everybody was accountable to the same standard. That standard might be applied differently to an individual person based on their individual station, but the standard remained the same. When you're dealing with schemes where power and control is the standard, standards therefore must be malleable and changeable in order to please the fickle mob known as the state. And so that's really what's inherent to all the various policies.
You know, I'm so looking forward to Steve being in Fort Worth next week with us at the Fight Laugh Feast conference. It's been too long since we've hung out, Steve.
I think in South Dakota was when last time.
I know, in person.
You guys gave me really bad COVID too, but I'll forgive that.
I don't know
getting out of your
about
system.
that.
So many of you guys don't know one of Steve's kind of behind the scenes lives or secret lives, I guess if you want to call it that. Is Steve has done a lot of political I am. He's done a lot of political consulting for like Ted Cruz and other campaigns, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so, Steve, whenever I've had like strategic conversations with you, I always find your thoughts very interesting. So if you were to like advise, let's say I got this ball rolling in a bigger way and I got kind of maybe more of a coalition to eliminate property taxes in the state of Idaho, how would you advise us? Because it really is a pickle of a problem because 50% of our property taxes go to public education, which is another idol. And then the biggest lobby organizations, the most powerful lobby organizations are the city and county lobbyists in Idaho. And then you have the education union.
Teachers union
in Idaho. That's obviously would just pull their hair out. So how would you like advise a state, to do a good job creating the narrative and, not stoking fear, all that stuff? How would you advise me?
I would have my alternative to that scheme already set up and determined.
Yep.
Is what I would do. I would not let them have an open shot at me because what they want to argue, Gabe, they want to argue you hate the kids. They don't want to argue the merit of their own policy. Okay. And so they want to argue demagoguery rather than the merit of their own ideology. So I would have an alternative scheme or system to fund these things, to call the bluff. Much of what happens in politics, and Dusty probably has learned this in his time, and even in a very red state legislature like Oklahoma, much of politics is false objections, and or there's the right reason politicians do things, and then there's the real reason that they do them. Never forget that. And a lot of times you've got to flesh out the false objection to get to the real reason, right? It's a little bit, well, nowadays they might, but for you, typically heretical churches don't put on their website, we're taking you to hell. We're heretics. They typically put there. Now you see the picture of the two lesbian ministers and their cats on the site, but they don't tell you we speak with forked tongue, right? And you'll read their beliefs and it looks like the Westminster Confession on their website. That's, you got to dig a little further, push back a little bit more before the right reason of what they're really doing comes out. And the same thing works in the political system. They want to argue anything other than the merit of your point. And so you've got to answer that objection up front. What is the alternative? So like Trump today saying, okay, we're eliminating income taxes. What are you going to exchange it with? Well, tariffs is kind of a user fee, basically. All right. Mm-hmm. So you have to have an alternative system in place to avoid getting demagogued.
Do you think that Trump's suggestion about potentially eliminating income tax and replacing it with tariffs, is there any reality to that at all?
With the current makeup of the Republican Party, no way. I think that I've said for years, Toby, the Republican Party is not a big tent; it's a big tarp. Okay. Tents have stakes in the ground,
right?
And they wobble in between the stakes, right? But there's cornerstones. Okay, this is a tarp. What's a tarp? Go to a ball game, right? Starts raining. You want to protect the field from the rain, so you put this temporary structure over the top of it. It's a temporary structure, and then when the rain is done and it's clear again, you roll the tarp back. And so what the Republican Party is it's a coalition of people that are it's Yalta into perpetuity. All right. So we've got Churchill, who was Labor and Tory. We've got FDR who's patriotic but wanted to stack the court, and you got Stalin, who's a friggin' who puts the X in Marxist. Right. Okay. Yeah. And they come together because they've got a common enemy named Adolf. All right. But when that enemy is gone, and now they have to figure out how are we going to live here in Western civilization together. They spend the next 60 years pointing their intercontinental ballistic missiles at one another. Okay. And that's what the Republican Party is. It's an alliance of people who don't want to be communists. But the problem is they don't know what they want to be instead, or even more likely, they can't agree on it. Yeah. All right. So you have some people who just want to be corporatists, some people who are neoconservatives, some people who are paleoconservatives, some people who are libertarians, some people who are Christofascists. Okay. And I mean that as a term of endearment for present company. Okay. So, you can't get these people to agree on how to govern. And that's why the thing often falls apart when the Republican Party gains power.
So, so here we are, 10 days. What are we out from election day?
Well, so our conference is now 6 days.
No, I'm talking about
it's going on right now.
Election.
Every state in the union is voting right now. Many battleground states have 25-30% of their vote already in. But
Wow.
So what's your feeling take, on the polls, Steve, on the and then Dusty, I got the same follow-up question with you on Trump versus Harris.
If I wasn't painfully aware of the machinery they have lurking underneath the surface there, I'd have a hard time containing my enthusiasm. Okay. I think Trump is winning on narrative, enthusiasm, and environment. Underneath that, we have a certain piece of machinery, and you guys know I love my sports analogies.
Yeah.
So right now, I'm where I was at with my Wolverines heading into the 2021 Ohio State game.
I'm sorry.
Okay, we lost 20 years in a row to those sons of guns. Okay. And I watched that team, and it was a different team. We had learned some lessons, but until I saw them actually could go out on the field and beat those guys in scarlet and gray, I needed to see it to believe it, even though it was clear this was different and better than the other teams we sent against them. Yeah. And so Trump is clearly polling ahead of anywhere he ever has. For better or for worse, and guys like Dusty, who are Republicans in elected office, they'll have to clean up this mess and figure out what it means moving forward. But Trump has expanded his base. And that's why he's polling ahead of the GOP. He has expanded his base to disaffected Democrats and old school liberals. Basically, Trump represents New York City of the 1980s and 90s. Our worldview is not ascendant, but it's also not imprisoned either. A David Wilkerson can preach the gospel at a church right there on Times Square, and a white guy named Rudy Giuliani can beat a black incumbent mayor on crime and punishment, and there aren't race riots. And it's enough of a melting pot where at least we're in the arena of ideas competing there. And what Kamala and Tampon Tim represent is Minneapolis and San Francisco of 2024. Where the e pluribus unum is dead, the social compact is killed. We trashed it. They trashed it on purpose, and our worldview is targeted for extinction. And I think that whatever is left of the old liberal left, hardcore civil libertarians that kind of emerged, we saw in a line with people like us during COVID, have now absorbed into Trump's coalition. And I think it's destabilized the Kamala Harris campaign, not to mention the fact she just sucks as a candidate.
So Steve, just real quick, so I'm mindful of your time. How many minutes or how long do you have with us, Steve?
I've got another 10 or 15.
Okay, great. Dusty, I went and voted today, and I got my paper ballot, marked out the ovals, and then went over to shove it into the machine. So you actually put it in a machine, and the machine reads it and tallies the votes.
Right.
I asked the poll watchers who don't know, they're just there to volunteer, they're poll watching kind of thing. I asked them, the woman standing by the machine, guarding it, I said, I put my ballot in this machine. I was like, how do I know the machine read my results correctly? And she's like, she's like, what? And she's surprised at my question. I was like, how do I know the machine's actually tallying what I did correctly and not taking my vote and putting it towards Kamala? And she calls her other poll watcher pal over, and I asked him the same question. He's like, what? Kind of leans in. I'm like, how do I know the machine?
It's a magic machine, Gabe. It's a magic machine. It always works.
And I had no intention of asking these questions. I just went over there and I just thought of it. I was like, oh, wait, this machine. Anyways, so they said they didn't know, which wasn't surprising to me. But they said basically you just need to trust the machine.
Yeah.
I don't get a receipt I don't even get a receipt that says, oh, you voted for Trump in this local election and this local election or whatever.
Yeah.
I didn't even get that.
It's gone.
And so I walked out and they're just feeling so uneasy about the whole situation. So Dusty, I know voter laws and everything's been super contentious. You're in Oklahoma. You're in a conservative state, but still, I'm in a conservative state and it's still weird.
Well, listen, Gabe, you should have known the answers to those things before you went to vote today.
I should have.
Yes.
They have no idea.
And listen, this is important. The reason why we don't have greater voter integrity is because God-fearing people don't know the answers to those questions. They don't know anything hardly at all about the election integrity in their state. They don't know their local pollsters, and they don't know their election overseers. They don't know all that. Mm-hmm. And there's very few that know. But on the left side, they have a well-oiled machine, and they will deploy it like we're deploying Patriot missiles in Ukraine right now. They know how to use the system, and they will tear us down. They don't sleep, but Christians have taken a back seat for so long. And this is I'm just using you as an example. I know you're a big boy, and you can put your big boy pants on and take the shot that I had across your bow, but that's just the truth, And everything that Steve said, Steve, it's good to meet you finally.
Yeah,
everything he said is right on point, but I think who's going to win? Well, look, if we had election integrity, if we didn't have a regime that had no holds barred view of elections and who don't care about the law. Clearly, they've done everything to prove they don't care about law. They are the law. They are the lex, and they are going to make the rex. And so, they are the rex, and they are going to make the lex. And we have so shirked a form of constitutionality with this regime in place that we can't even know for sure, much less election integrity. We can't even know for sure that Trump's going to make it to to November 5th. And who knows about Kamala? We would think that they would, but they've already tried to assassinate him at least twice. And I just don't foresee that would be outside of the range, much less if he did win, getting to January 20th.
So, but Steve, I'm with you. I tweeted out a couple weeks ago. I said I think Trump wins in a landslide. It just seems like that, and it seems like every day you find another rapper or football player who never would have voted for Trump now voting for Trump. Even like some of the odd situations or what would be considered odd in this world. But if the election's close, he loses.
That there is an angle to this election that I do think is fascinating, okay. And I have panned most of my career We in conservative media, we like to tell people things that aren't true as well. But albeit it's for a different motivation most of the time. Right. I mean, they lie to their base in order to manipulate them for will to power schemes. We do it to pet our base, to comfort them, and we have an entire generation of white boomers who have been smeared falsely as racists, and they're so tired of hearing it that we will just generate content on the right. A lot of times stuff that just is easily debunked and untrue. That, essentially there's always, all my life, there's been a narrative, the brothers be flipping every election cycle. All right. So that, the average age of a Fox News viewer is 69 years old. Yes. Those poor people have been called racist their entire lives and they're tired of it, right? They want absolution. All right. And so we have lied to ourselves about this for cycle after cycle, but this might be the first time that we'd see at least some movement here. Now, I do think in the data that I have seen, and then just what I see with anecdotally to kind of confirm that within the zeitgeist, what you were referencing there in general, I do think within the Black and Hispanic community, there is, within the men of those communities, they have reached a fed up point with what I call and is often referred to as Yas Queen culture. Okay. Which is the urban version of when, white people like us say, when mom ain't happy, nobody's happy. It's the urban version of this. Right. Yep. Okay? And I do think the final straw is putting an absolute nitwit, as Mel Gibson said a half an hour ago, with the IQ of a lamppost, who cannot think her way out of a paper bag, basically slept her way, the oldest possible profession to get into this gig in the first place. Then she's married to a white guy and a very effeminate one who likes to slap women around. Yeah. And if you've been told, if you are a Black man or a Hispanic man and you have been told for the last generation, you're already a generation ahead of white America on the matriarchy. We're catching up, but they're a generation ahead. And I me, I've said for years, the only thing worse than the patriarchy is going to be the matriarchy. Just wait and see. Right. Okay. And I think if you've been looking for your moment to plant your flag and say, oh, heck no more of this. Okay. This is the bridge too far. I think she presents it. And I do think it is possible, particularly among, younger Black men and Hispanic men who are on their second generation of living here and view themselves more as Americans now than people of the country that their previous generation came here from. I do sense a backlash there. And I think they sense it too. They're afraid. And they're trying to pull out all the stops to keep that kind of group in line. You had Obama come out and just try to shame these folks about a week ago. And I do think that you may see, I think it's possible the number of Hispanics that Trump ends up with on election night begins with the number 4. I think it's possible the amount of Black men that Donald Trump ends up with on election night begins with the number 2. And I think that's an added component to this election that I just think, and the kind of the secular analogy I would draw is if you guys remember the movie Boys in the Hood from 30 years ago. Oh, yeah. Boys in the Hood is about this. Lawrence Fishburne plays a Black father, divorced, and the single mom of his son wants to keep him away and grow him up to be like her. And he can't get in to make him, into a man. Yeah. And finally works his way into his son's life. And much of the movie is about what happens with a generation without masculine role models. And I just think someone who's more Indian than African-American, someone who's married a really effeminate white guy, someone with the IQ of a gnat after you've smacked it off your arm. I think that there is a matriarchal backlash is going to occur in this election. I do.
Interesting. Kamala just seems too all your analogies are cracking me up, but it's just like the worst. I mean, I don't know, like every red-blooded young man, I think of like 8th grade or 9th grade, and there was this one lady teacher.
Yes.
That everybody hated, who just like the way she talked at you, you just like, you felt like everything in your body like boiled against like the way she was condescending to you. And it feels like that's the Democratic nominee.
100%.
100%. Agreed.
Hey, can I talk about a group that we haven't spoken about?
Yes,
and I think it's going to affect the poll results to a degree. There's a Gallup report that came out in June. It showed a slight uptick of pro-abortion sentiment since the overturn of Roe versus Wade. But from that report, it says this, quote, "The shift toward more public support for abortion rights has occurred exclusively among Democrats, while the views of Republicans and independents are statistically unchanged." So they have the Democrats have shored up their base. They've added on more voters. But what's happening, though, on the Republican side is that in 2020, Gallup reported that 61.3% of Christians were voting, but in 2024, they're projecting that only 50% of Christians will vote. That's a major change, and what Gallup is saying, and what I agree with them, is that the liberalizing of the platform on abortion is disincentivizing the bulwark of the Republican Party, which is the evangelical base. And if we liberalize it, not only it disincentivizes them, but it moves the base, and you end up with something that Steve talked about just a second ago. He's saying somebody's going to have to mop up and clean up the problem with what's happened to our platform after the fact. And that's a real issue. If you remove Christian morality from the party platform and then proudly liberalize on these issues that matter most to Christians, and then be upset at them for not being enthusiastic about political engagement, well, who's got the problem here? So Republicans can't win without Christians. Donald Trump might here, but they need to start acting like Christians really are the bulwark, and Christians are going to have to fight in such a way where they prove that they are the bulwark.
Yeah. Dusty,
can I address,
please, Steve. Please, Steve. Go.
I address that really quick?
Yes.
I think, Dusty, is exactly right, but I don't know that it will manifest itself as much of a problem in this election, although it will be a major one moving forward. And here's why. You have a unique situation here where the guy that liberalized the party was president before.
Yeah.
And even though he wasn't where the four guys doing this conversation would be, he was also the most sincerely friendliest to us of any Republican that had been in the White House, at least since the 80s, if not ever.
Right.
And so there's this conflict between, well, when he was in office, he did mostly right by us. On the other hand, his rhetoric is the worst we've ever seen from a Republican standard bearer in the history of the party at the same time. So his record is one of the best we've ever seen. His rhetoric's one of the worst. And then they nominate, the daughter of Marxists, who's, I'd call her dumber than a box of rocks, but somewhere within the 9 realms of the Marvel Cinematic Universe are probably some sentient rocks, and I don't want to insult them. So I think in this election, he's going to mostly get a pass, because he's still going to get a huge turnout, and he's going to compensate for some of the people that he lost with some of the people I just talked about. But moving forward in the long run, this is absolutely going to have to be adjudicated, and it's not going to be an easy adjudication. Yeah. My guess is, if we're lucky enough to have a country in the 2028 cycle still, this will be something that'll be heavily debated, say in a JD Vance, Ron DeSantis primary, hypothetically speaking, where Ron is going to probably represent kind of the old school of what the GOP platform should be. And JD, who has been good as a vote on our issues as a senator, and is maybe going to represent more of the nuanced view of where Trump and MAGA wants to take us. Or he could decide that, he was a pretty committed social conservative, as a young man. Maybe he'll decide to go back to that. We don't know. But the coalition is being somewhat redrawn here now. And some of this will have to be adjudicated moving forward. I think that as the pro-life group and community, the pre-Roe pro-life paradigm, you're watching it die right now. All that it can do now is hold a march in January. All of its political clout is evaporating right in front of us right now, right?
Yeah.
And so what will be debated is what's going to replace it moving forward.
So, Dusty, you mentioned that the Democrats are adding more votes to their party, but also, as I've seen the numbers, Florida has registered more Republicans under Ron DeSantis. Pennsylvania, apparently, this last couple months, or this last 6 months, Pennsylvania, I think, has had a surge in Republicans registering for as a voter. And AZ, Arizona, Charlie Kirk, I think, has done a great job in Arizona, adding more votes. Am I reading some of these things wrong?
No, I was particularly talking about abortion voting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, but how would you read some of these, excluding Florida, but Arizona and PA, if they're got more registered voters, especially on the conservative side, in these states? How would you read that as it relates to a Trump victory on November 5th?
Well, if Trump brought them in with his rhetoric, then you would expect them to vote alongside him. I don't think that they would not vote for Trump. It just doesn't make sense. If the growth of the Republican Party is, particularly in these states, is due to the Trump team and their ground game, then of course I would expect them to vote more on that along his lines. But what I'm saying is, for those Christians who are strongly pro-life, what Barna is showing is that we aren't seeing an uptick of more of those voters. We aren't seeing those voters actually mobilized either, and that's part of the fundamental job of a candidate. But what Trump has done is not energize the historic base of the Republican Party. He's shifted the center of the base to the left.
Steve, I know you probably got one question left before you got to go. I guess
I got a question. Can I interject?
Sure. Go ahead.
I want to ask both of you. Maybe this can be just a final question for both of you.
Because I know Dusty's got to go too.
Yeah, so. I got to go, Gabe. I got dinner, man. So given the state of the Republican Party, this ties in maybe with what we were talking about earlier, and was just with like taxation, even thinking about like not being statists. Thinking about the fact that we have our rights from God. That means that our property belongs to us, our income belongs to us. That we are not to be beholden to the state. We're not to be slaves of the state. Which again is all of this is tied up together. Which you talk about this coalition of Republicans. What are we? We're not flaming commies. I think that's sort of like the one thing we have in common. What from each of you? I'd like to hear how do we? And I'm talking about we, like the four of us, those of you that hold our views. How do we argue for? How do we push the needle somewhat in the direction of can we please begin working towards an old school biblical Christian conservatism?
Let me answer that first because I got to go and. My answer will actually set Dusty up. Okay. Ultimately, Washington, D.C. is the capital in the Hunger Games. It's District 1. At this point, you're just trying to throw as many Katniss Everdeen's at President Snow as you possibly can. Okay. So he doesn't run you over.
Okay.
The real affirmative battle of where the paradigm will shift is where Dusty is at.
Yes.
And it's not just the chamber he's in, but the state he's in. We have to start by making red states every bit, and I mean not states recently red like my Iowa, states historically red like Dusty's Oklahoma, your Idaho.
Yeah.
We have to make those states every bit as red as California and Illinois and New York are blue.
That's right.
In January of 2017, when Trump won the first time, when he took the oath of office, there were the fewest elected Democrats nationwide in America since before the Great Depression. We all laughed at their videos of their wailing and gnashing of teeth. But let me tell you what the city council in San Francisco did the morning Trump was inaugurated. They didn't get up and they said, "Oh, snap. Republicans have total control in Washington. I guess we'll stop doing free needles for drug addicted trans homeless people and hotel rooms in San Francisco. Right. I guess we won't have a poop map in San Francisco anymore. Trump won." They didn't do that. Okay. The homeless people pooped on the street even more than they were before. And they put even more trans homeless people in free hotel rooms. They put them in nicer hotel rooms with bigger needles to shoot up with. They just San Francisco'd on. All right. They just carried on with their belief. They owned all the machinery, all the local infrastructure, and they almost insulated themselves almost, you can't do it entirely, but almost completely from Washington, D.C. And this is what our red states have to do. That is where we have a chance to do paradigm shifting politics. At this point, Washington, D.C. we are literally trying to stop that rot gut from getting into the water table and infesting us all. And where we can really turn things around are in chambers like where Dusty is, and with guys doing what people like some of the stuff that Dusty is trying to do.
Steve, look forward to seeing you next
you.
week. You and your wife next week at Fight Laugh Feast
We'll see you soon,
Fort
man.
Worth.
God bless. Take care.
Yep.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Dusty, final thoughts, man.
Yeah, I mean, Steve is exactly right. And the fight should have always been at the states level. Our founding fathers knew this. They set it up to be a states' rights issue, and states should have the power to do so. And what you're seeing is the left knows that that is where the fight is, and they are doing everything they can to purpleize red states. They are doing ballot initiatives in these states that they're bringing up, like in Florida and in Missouri and in these other states. They are working on ballot initiatives because they will bring big money in. They'll go to these big cities. They'll get the petitions signed that will bring a change in the Constitution. They're doing this through immigration. And dropping in people from the border. They're doing it through campaign funding for these various candidates who are willing to take money and then do some of the bidding. They're doing it through running laws that will incentivize them. They're doing it through ballot, not just ballot initiatives, but voting work that they're doing. And they're doing it through economic development and tax incentives. They're moving us away from free markets more and more to greater and greater wealth redistribution, and they are purpleizing our red states. So yes, the fight is at the state level, and it's at the grassroots level where we are having to raise up Christian men with strong backbones who will stand up and say exactly what we've said for all these years and been quiet about. We have to have pastors who are pounding the pulpit with the word of God and teaching that Christ is Lord and all government is a servant of the people, and it only has power as God has delegated the power. And Thomas Jefferson even talked about this. He says, all power is inherent in the people, and the people have a right and a duty to be armed, but this right assumes that people will wield it with responsibility and virtue and truth, and not in a Stockholm Syndrome type of an arrangement where they fall in love with their government overseers. And James Madison, in Federalist 48, talks about the Constitution as a parchment barrier. That means that the written laws can only restrain government power to the degree that the people's morality will allow it. So we have a states' rights fight that is coming. And I think that it's probably at its tip on abortion, but it could be on any number of issues, just depending on who becomes a president.
Dusty, appreciate you, man, and looking forward to seeing you next week as well.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, if you're single, get married, go have kids. If you have kids, you got to baptize them. Sorry, Dusty. Sorry. Get them off the screen. You got to see. Okay. Until next week, love God with your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor and self. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politics.